So today I'm with Steve and Eugene from EOS Tribe. Gentlemen, how are you doing today? Welcome to the Cryptoverse.
Good.
Thank
How
you
are
for
you?
having us.
Doing
Good.
excellent, doing
Thanks for.
excellent. So you guys were just saying you've been traveling quite a bit, yeah?
Yeah, we just got back about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago from Tulip and the
Tulip.
workshop that Eugene did out there. We were actually there the next week, that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, doing a workshop, and then pretty much straight from that point, we've just been trying to camp. We weren't able to campaign as heavily during that time. We were kind of put back a little bit. It kind of staggered us, but we bounced right back and got in the groove, and been trying to get stuff out and educate the token holders. So
Sure.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, it was great to meet everyone. We worked so hard, online, and so many faces actually, had to meet first time face to face. That it was great. I mean, it was great, and we had this event, and then on weekend it was a go live, right? And everybody just
Hmm.
rushed into this
beautiful,
that
man.
weekend working,
Beautiful.
and then believe it or not. Right after that, Monday and Tuesday was technical sessions where I had to teach with Phil.
Hmm.
So I was,
Phil
had to get
Mesny.
ready
Mesny.
for
Yeah.
that as well. And so, but we were able to accomplish everything. It went great, and not long ago, Tulip have passed. I'm actually, getting ready to leave tonight. I have a flight to fly to China. Asia is very important. Region for us, and we're positioning EOS Tribe as an international organization.
Hmm.
So I'll be spending few days meeting people in China, and there's an important meeting coming up on July 1st.
We'll also be doing a tour through Europe to kind of coincide either like into the summer, August, September timeframe, possibly closer to like the November, to coincide with the BP summit that BitSpace is doing
Hmm.
as well. And we're just going to hit up pretty much everything from England to China for like 2 or 3 weeks, and just heavily doing a traveling, basically the independent BP tour
Hmm.
with several other BPs that are also going to be in the region, and we're doing something similar. So we're all just kind of teaming up and doing these little pop-up like art shows and donating to local communities, basically to show them how we get down here in the West. You know what I mean? So,
Sure, absolutely. So it's like the premise of our discussion was the underdog blog producers, right? Because I'll put you guys in that category because and this I think this happened to a lot of the blog producers that have ended up outside the top 60 is that
hey,
there
we're
were
not we're not complaining, man. We're grateful to be where we're at. So we're
where are
not
you at right
complaining.
now?
We're like number 46. We've shifted
46.
between about
Okay, you're in the
30,
money zone.
39 to 46. Yeah, yeah. We've stayed in there. People have kept us in, and we're not complaining. We thought it was interesting that someone did the data on this, and I'll send you the link so your audience can look closer at it. But it was very interesting to us that we are the very tippy top like block producer, independent block producer that had no whale votes. So we're the highest ranking person with like really no whale votes to speak of. You know what I mean? You got to have at least one or two to be up in the top 30. You know what I mean? And we did not get any, not one. And with that said, any whales out there, any investors, please send your votes our way. But yeah, I mean that's we thought that was interesting because it kind of like we can say we're the independent candidate. We've got culture, like we speak for the people and all this stuff because it's really like an extension of politics, right? Like
It
you
is,
have
right?
you have Democrats, you have libertarians, you have anarchists, you have all these different types of groups, and we really dig just middle of the road old school libertarian, you know what I mean? Like sound money. We're centrist. We're not radical, but we're not like pro, we recognize that there are problems with the existing system. We're not apologists for that either. And it's, we just think balance, like a balanced organization and like anything else would help the network, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
find it, we're kind of a conduit for all of those voices because we tend to want to factor that into what we put out. If we hear a really good
Right.
idea, and it might be from some of the ANCAP crowd, they've got a point, we'll definitely boost them up. But same thing with same thing that we hear with some of the more establishment types are like, we need to integrate to drive adoption. Like we can't be like so far out there that these people don't want to do business with us. And we understand that argument too. And that's a
Right.
big part of our rollout and plan. The next 30 days, we've got a new website launching. a huge, massive FAQ, several tools, a wallet, the Metatron wallet that we're working on. It's one of the most beautiful interfaces in the entire space. I mean, I guarantee you Block One will come to poach, like right out of the gate. I'm telling you right now, this thing is beautiful. Like when people see it, they're going to be like, whoa.
Yeah.
So that we've been taking our times, and to complement that, a mobile iPhone wallet with us soon after, probably in the next 60 to 90 days, Android support as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to really, we looked around, we looked at the best practice, like security methods, props to Graymass and many people, Simple EOS and many people who have contributed existing wallets. And we wanted to try to take all that and, just put together like a best in class wallet with some of Eugene's security experience. So I've shilled enough. I'll let Eugene talk about that.
Yeah, and I would like to add that we are also collaborating in a community in some software projects, including multi-sig wallet for hardware. Hardware
beautiful.
Wallets. There is that project which is just starting up. So we will work as a community, and EOS Pay, I believe, on that wallet as well. I would like to add to Steve's earlier point on our position, right? It was interesting that first when we launched the blockchain, and we were one of the top 10 first couple of days. So, and I was, popped the champagne, and it was like, yeah, we made it. I guess it was.
And like I said on CoinDesk, it was Wales election. With respect, we're not being disrespectful, but
it's an experiment, right? I mean, it's an experiment on governance in a blockchain. And kind of rediscovering, they should have discovered, centuries ago. Maybe we should have learned from history before we entered it. But that's the reason why we don't use popular vote in United States. So it is, we don't want powerful states like California and New York, as much as we love them, but we don't want them to overpower smaller states. So what
Texas
we
is
have
starting to
with the
become that
blockchain right now, what we have in a blockchain, is that we have strong players kind of overpowering everybody else. When you have a popular vote, imagine you lived in a society when your bank account was your weight of your vote. Let's say you had $100,
right.
And your vote only goes as long as $100. If you had $100 million, that's as much.
Well, then you would be the president.
So that's kind of a similar system we have today. I understand it's a proof of stake, but still in terms of governance, we need to find more balance to the system to make it more decentralized, because the way we have it right now, we have a centralization of power, right, in the major token holders and also geographic location. We need to think how we can make the system more inclusive and fair.
And then if you do it one-to-one, you open yourself up, let's talk about Sybil and her family, right? Like Thomas,
that's the thing. You can't do that, right?
It has to be a balance. Obviously, the more you have, the more weight you should have. But it has to
cut
be
off. Should cut off at a certain point.
But the thing with the one person, one vote thing, there's no point in us talking about that until we can do a full identity.
Exactly, and that's
not
an option
it's a moot
too.
point, right?
That's not an option too. So
right.
Yeah.
So
I think it could be, but that goes back to the referendum contract, and then unlocking the $1 million a day going into the EOS.savings account right now that is really causing a lot of the stagnation. So rather than, we said our piece in Gov. A lot of people back last week got mad at me for challenging Dan, and now Thomas is challenging Dan. So, I know where the choke points are. I've watched like when things start to get off the track, and rather than, a bunch of people were whispering fork. Well, I came right out in the group the day that it was being whispered and said, this is what the 50 or 60 people under the pay rate are whispering. I mean, they're very unhappy. This is not what they signed up for. You changed the whole game like 2 weeks before. So the underdogs have a very legitimate voice, in that, and they're working on a great campaign to keep EOS decentralized. It's a great group being led by Rodrigo, from EOS Detroit, the guys from Blocksmith, very competent people, Craig and them, and Shaheen and Verbus. And, we've got some really good guys, Brett from EOS World, that regardless of their role or if they're technical, they're they're really dedicated to this vision, and they had like a long-term, view. If like, oh, they were okay with being number 30 or just being a supporting node. Of course they wanted to be, but they just wanted to at least get into, and some of them didn't, so they're launching a campaign that everyone will see roll out. And, when you guys see that out there, support them, because there's a lot of, if you go to, eoswire.org/BP compliance. A lot of you have been seeing that circulate, where it's got a grade of all the BPs and whether or not they were in compliance. Like some people know how the BP JSON file. Some people, there was someone just the other day, a day or two ago, that just completely didn't update the whitelist and, or blacklist or whatever. And that money just disappeared. So that cost, token holders money, obviously, and that's not the promise that we made for this chain. So it's been a cluster fail, like in some regards, because it's like Eugene said, it's an experiment. But the choke points, the problem is that they're the worker proposal system and the referendum contract, which is essentially just a voting mechanism. And several people were working on it. That effort has come together. I'm actually in both. I'm in the voter proxy group doing stuff. I'm in the worker proposal system group contributing, and in the, in the referendum contract, where I'm doing the most work for the UI. And I realized we could amalgamate all of these groups, because essentially they just need to be educated on what the referendums are and the problems that we're having. And then they go vote on them. And then we see what this really is. Then we force the whale's hands, because if they...
let me pick up a point there, because you've got a good point going on here. So check this out. You said worker proposal system, all this money, right? It's 4 out of the 5% of inflation is just piling up in this savings account.
Right, $1 million a day.
Right, exactly, right. So check this. So you almost said that. I think maybe I heard this. Maybe you said this. I don't know. But once the system's cooking, it will be the people providing the most value to the network that will start acquiring all that EOS, right?
Well, that's the problem. That's the problem. It's going to be based on the same voting mechanism that got the whales voted in.
Yeah, so let me finish the point, right? So check this out.
If you look at Yumbi, for example, who has added a ton of value as an exchange and their work in the ecosystem, but everyone remembers the worker proposal system with BitShares, and that was a big stinker. You know what I mean? And at the same time, they're a business. They're there to make money. So you can't, it's easy for us plebes to get mad and like, oh, you guys are, but from their perspective, they're watching out for their interests, just like you would. So it's tough. It really, if we're fair, that's a tough argument. It really is. But
what I was going to say though, right, is
78% of the people in the network, the rest of us would say that's not a good thing, right? So, I
think that the important distinction though is that EOS doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? If we use nesting bubbles, you've got the whole value system in the world, fiat economy and everything, right? And the whales have somehow acquired a ton of value by providing value in that system. So they've stockpiled loads of US dollars. They've then chosen to use those US dollars to buy EOS tokens, which give them a disproportionate amount of power in this little tiny bubble, the 10, 11 billion market cap EOS that is. Now, when that grows, if it becomes the world economy, say, inside EOS, fine, right? But until that point, you can still earn a ton of value outside, inject it in, and essentially have a disproportionate amount of power based on how much money you've got, right? And that short circuit...
If I can add, there's a good book. Many of your listeners probably have read. It's a classic. It's called Why Nations Fail.
Why Nations Fail.
And it explains economic model.
Okay.
And the way, there are different cycles. We want to avoid centralization of power. Yes. And that's a danger zone we are in currently. When you have a centralization of powers and you have emergence of elite, and what elites do is they want to solidify their position, and so they block entry for newcomers. And by doing that, they actually the whole system will fail over time.
So
in
they
real,
actually destroy the system that they're part of
they
eventually.
destroy the systems and they destroy themselves in a short. So they're only seeing short-term interest for themselves, but they fail in the long-term. Everyone, including themselves. It's a lesson we learned from history. And we should apply those lessons, when we're building digital economy. When we're building this whole EOS, environment, it's a global economic layer that we are putting in place right now. The more inclusive we are, the more global we are, the more wealth everyone will get, including whales, right? Not everyone can realize it, but if we distribute power, if we invite more inclusive, even if we give up something in a short term, there's so much more we gain in the long term that it overshadows everything else. Absolutely. I would like us to see, we have traditionally have been centralization of power in West, Asia, right, Europe, and there is a whole world outside, Africa, South America. There are so many countries that are not at the table right now. And we need to invite them to this table. We need to be more inclusive. Maybe we should have a cap in terms of number of block producers per country, so we can have those smaller countries represented in this blockchain. And that will create the whole economic ecosystem in their countries, right? And it will prop up their economy. And we have a wide distribution and more global reach at the end.
And what's crazy about it is that we would actually quell a lot of the hate from the areas that we have problems in, that we have to go constantly funnel money in, that just gets taken by warlords. We would effectively ease that a little bit and not have to have as much military spending. So there's a real positive feedback loop there that the powers that be are just totally missing. It's like, this benefits you. You'll have a safer world. You'll make more money with less liability. What's the problem? You know what I mean? It's real simple, but
it's just an alien concept, I guess.
Yeah, but that's why I am focusing. I'm going back to the worker proposal system, the referendum contract, and these choke points, because these are three, and the voter proxies. These are three disparate, interfaces basically that were separate projects in the ecosystem you've seen. And I presented to the group in the referendum proposal that, hey, I'll make an interface that has basically these three areas that everyone is trying to get a focus on. We'll have a massive voter education push, just like the EOS portal, that coincidentally, it wasn't the majority. Gray Mass actually had a big chunk of that because they were trusted in the ecosystem prior to Steemit. But about 30-40% of the overall vote came through the voting portal. It played its part. And Bitfinex did too. Everyone's mad at Bitfinex now. I mean, we don't really bash Bitfinex, not just because they're whales, but because, let's be serious, I mean, they've contributed liquidity to this entire ecosystem. You know what I'm saying? Like Dan said, it'd be like biting the hand that feeds. I mean, they have provided as many mistakes as they've made. They have provided a lot, they helped unlock the chain.
That's a good point.
So it's one of those balances, that we have to look at and say, man, I mean, us as an independent BP may want to think that we can go scale some global enterprise level, infrastructure, but we need all different players, at different levels to get to that level. I think that, to Eugene's point, we just need to find a balance to that. So that voter education will unlock this problem, I believe. And then if we can't prove it, if we can't get referendum and voting to change this, and they're keeping this, stagnant, well, then we have our answer. The whole ecosystem does.
That thing about Bitfinex, right? That was the same point I was making, that they've provided value outside of EOS, but inside of the crypto space, and they've basically used that to, foray their position and cash in some of that social capital to become now the #1 block producer, right? So it's easy to get mad at them, like you say, but at the same time, you don't want to buy the hand that feeds. So
right. Well, also, I mean, they earn that through providing value in the market, like you said, and there's a balance. There's two sides to these stories. And if all of us could just stop fighting and start working through the referendum contract, and if they have to give up some power through their vote weight, and they may not be #1, maybe they're number 17, you know what I'm saying? And maybe it's a mix. it's different. It's not as easily controlled. And I think that will, it will force the hand, the invisible hand of the market that we're all concerned about. And then then we'll have our answer. If there's no way to fix the system, if it's pretty much what it's going to be indefinitely, and we're not going to be able to make much progress or get anything through, I think that can be remedied by voter education. I really do. That's why this project, eosvotes.io, that the guys from, EOS Canada is contributing to this, EOS Nation, also Dennis Curry and ourselves, and I think it's Sakesh, from EOS Green or Eco. I may have gotten that wrong. I apologize, but we're all kind of trying to come up with an equivalency of the EOS Portal project, which was very good for just people. You have to understand, in the West and some parts of Europe, like, they don't even understand how this works. Like, it's a design problem. It really is. I mean, it legitimately is. And everyone that I talk to, like 70% of this ecosystem right now is all engineers. I'm like an HCI UX guy. That's why.
I was going to say, what kind of design? You mean
user experience
right.
Overall, like, I guide UI designers, branding people. I mean, I've done it all. Like, I'm more of a senior person these days. I can still design. People see my stuff, but I'm more trying to guide the process and make sure that and all the components, the architecture of the whole thing meets, the end game. That's what I do. HCI stuff, high level stuff these days. But I started out if this tells you, a offset print designer in the mid to late 90s. So I've been doing it a long, long time, right. Crawled my way out of each facets of those disciplines, running my own agency. I'm a regular speaker at Big Design. I'll actually be speaking this year at Brian Sullivan's conference for the same thing I presented at Tulip, basically, driving blockchain adoption, the future of blockchain adoption. And that core subject is really two parts. Like, we have to face our own bullshit, excuse my language, but we do. As a larger ecosystem of crypto, we have to really face how the incumbent system looks at us. And it's not their job to make it easy for us. Like, we have to get our stuff together and be compliant and, do the things that real companies do. We don't go get a huge ICO and pump it before with nothing but a white paper. We ship a product, we add value, we onboard users, we improve the overall narrative, and add value. And those people come in and then we may do an airdrop, and those people are activated, and there's 10 times more users. And if certainly that coin has some value, we could go sell some of those coins because it's proven itself in the market. That's a little more fair, I think, way we should be operating anyways. It should be gifted. I love airdrops because they're kind of like the new ICO. Everyone's rushing in, but I don't think that they understand the rules.
Right.
It's like there's certain rules in EOS. Like, you can certainly just go dump your share drop with a website and a white paper, but I would start pushing updates to the chain first before, like, personally.
Otherwise your token's never going to acquire value.
You have to be really careful about this. I mean, being based in EOS, and we have to follow local, legal framework.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're pretty safe. You use, if it's use token,
utility.
Or if you're trying to raise funds for something that have not been built,
go through Reg D.
That qualifies as a security. As a Howdy test, famous test. If it looks like security, if it smells like security, it's security. And then, if you're not registered with Security and Commissions and you do something like this, that's dangerous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I mean, that's why I like the airdrop model, and I'm excited that a lot of people are getting excited. But it might be just want to say that in this interview that build a product first, like have a well-vetted, peer-reviewed like white paper. Go through Reg D if you're doing any fundraising, like register, establish your company in Wyoming. Have do an international business if you have pass-through income coming internationally. Like, file all your paperwork. It's not that big of a deal. Like, get your stuff together, guys. Like, we will look better as an ecosystem. They will respect us a lot more if we do that.
Mm-hmm. Steve, earlier on, you said if we could just stop fighting, right? And often,
well, in general, that's not directed at anybody. No, I don't want to be.
I've got a point to make on this, right? So this takes me back to the original token distribution method for EOS, right? There was a lot, a high expectation of that somehow a mechanism can somehow, solve problems that aren't technology problems. So like the distribution of wealth thing, for example, that's more of a human problem, right? So the whole idea of let's do this 1 year ICO thing, and then the intention was more evenly distribute the tokens. That was beyond the control of the system. And of course, EOS or no EOS, the exact same disparity of wealth just transferred itself into the EOS ecosystem and has caused the majority of problems we're now seeing, right?
Totally agree. That's what we were just saying. We recognize it, but there are methods that are, as Eugene said, I mean, you have to understand, like, this stuff has affected Eugene's quality of life more so than us, like, you know, Brits and Westerners. Like, he's lived in different cycles in Russia, in the small town he came up in, that were brutal, and he's seen corruption, you know, and he would like to see why he's committed so much of his life. This guy's got a PhD. He's you know, secured some of the largest targets in the world, you know, and that deserves.
Let me add to myself. So I, you know, grew up in the Soviet Union, so I have seen what the communism system is like. So then I lived through times when it all fell apart and we switched to capitalism overnight. That wasn't a good idea. Chinese are much smarter than, you know, us, and they did this transition, and you can see how much they have flourished, right? But they kept tight control on the economy and system. So, and I lived, you know, I have seen hyperinflation, you know, what it does, how society changes depending on the framework, you know, government without government. And that's why I'm kind of pessimistic about approach, like, you know, some of the anarcho-capitalists take, that if we remove government, it's just going to be peace and prosperity.
Just spontaneously self-organize.
It's not happening. I mean, the humanity whole history is a proof for thousands of years that this will not happen. If you remove, yes, government is, you know, we see it as an evil sometimes, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. Right. So we cannot, as humans in a society, live without any type of government. If we remove government, what happens? We are called tribe, right? Society is breaking up to smaller tribes with local leaders, and then they start fighting for resources, and it's gonna be hell. It's much better to have, and much more peaceful to have, one centralized government which enforces your property rights, and so you're free to go and take the risk and do business, and you know that whatever you produce will not be taken away from you. That's the whole purpose of all.
Or better yet, turn those governments into inputs and mechanisms that remove the need for, you know, for failure. You know what I mean? That we've seen, and the corruption that we've seen, because once you centralize, you end up right back where you started, whether it's a tribe or a nation or a world government. We're always going to end up with the same problems. They're just going to get worse as that consolidates. So it's the answer somewhere in between. Turn the choke points into DAX, you know, as many have said, and the utility layer. Yeah, the utility layer into DAX. And then there are stewards who can be voted in and voted out based on their behavior. And they're rewarded well, you know, for doing a good job. They live good lives. You know what I'm saying? They can provide for themselves. But if they don't, they lose their job.
I really like EOS DAC idea, and I really like the way they implement it. I think that's the way of the future. That's the way to decentralized power. We have to take power away from people. If you leave that decision up to humans, society, they will do everything in their power to gain more power. That's just human nature. So you have to take it away.
We have to be the generation that gives that up. That instead of when the guard passes to us, we don't take it. We like literally put it into a machine, the inputs and systems that could that at least keep people transparent and accountable. So that just doesn't, those layers, the water companies and the municipalities and these layers of corruption that we all the way up to the government, those key layers, there's this audit layer for the public. And these independent news organizations that we're seeing happen in EOS are like a little microcosm of what you would see. There'd be little cottage industries pop up, and the more news and value they give for transparency, the more value they, take out. And it's just definitely, now, not all layers. I think that many other layers that serve a purpose. People like always bash banks. And I'm like, banks' business model, it's not that banks are bad. It's that like centralized banking, any kind of centralization can end up like Eugene said, bad over time. So we can kind of fix those layers, but leave, people in the areas where you need discernment, you need a human layer, from hospitals to schools. I mean, we still need people, we can't, everything's not going to be automated, but some layers of accountability, like where the corruption happens at the administrative layer, will be exposed, to either a private chains or public permission chains. And, governed blockchains are the future, not this version that we're seeing right now. This is like the proto, like our 2-year-old baby just dead. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's not going to be like this, but to the token holders out there, we're sorry.
In terms of government, I have to say this, we were building digital economy and digital, in terms of governments, we were building digital democracy, but I don't think what we have today is, a democracy in its meaning of this, governance. We have more of a medieval aristocracy, I would say,
in EOS
today, and we need to evolve. But that's a point that we are in right now.
Are you talking about in EOS or in the wider world, Eugene?
EOS.
In EOS, right, I got you. Right, got you.
There's someone say a quasi-democratic aristocracy.
Right.
Quasi-democratic. We have votes. We have voting systems.
You can vote. It's like the casino gulag, right? You're putting it in, but you're not getting much out. You know what I mean?
Right. So the DAC thing may be one of the keys here. Perhaps the problem is, and I'm sort of having a mini breakthrough in my own mind right now, which is you've got this monolithic EOS blockchain with these 21 block producers that everyone votes for, but there's only sort of one layer of incentive, which is if you don't like the behavior of Bitfinex or EOS Canada, the top two, you vote them out, which is a bit all or nothing type of thing, right? Whereas with EOS DAC, for example, they have a governance layer, a second governance layer that allows EOS DAC token holders to steer that particular block producer in a way that not just the EOS token holders, but the EOS DAC token holders prefer. And imagine if that was going on in its entirety. Every block producer had its own set of stakeholders that could steer it, right? It wouldn't just be sack off the entire block producer and replace it with another one, because you might not hate all of their behavior. It just might just be this thing or this thing that needs tweaking, right? So when people
make mistakes, I think that there was, we were setting a really bad precedent too, and I'm guilty. I mean, I was bringing it up as well because I was just really upset with a combination of things that I saw. And I pointed out, if you're not disclosing your ownership and you're not updating your BP.json file, and you're lying about it, you just broke the Constitution and the Reg Producer Agreement. Those are grounds to be voted out, or forked out, one way or the other. And that's, I think that's too extreme too in these early days, like at least right now, because people are testing, like Dan said, people are testing the limits and what they can get away with. We should not pull out our pitchforks quite yet, or our forks, and that's basically, I feel like we have to give it time, to shake out and get the referendum contract and some of the stuff in place. If we do that, and I'll say this again, and nothing happens, then some of those arguments have a lot of teeth, because then there's a problem, you know what I mean? And what do we do? And I'm asking you guys too, just in this conversation here, what would we do if the worst possible case scenario happened? They'd consolidated enough stake to vote down any kind of, vote out any kind of referendum to change the rules that would hurt them. And then at the same time, they aggressively vote and position their vendors to raid, the EOS .savings or push things through that were counterproductive to the network, but beneficial to them. And that happened. Like the worst case scenario, everyone's saying, what do you guys think would happen, or what should we do?
So I can add, and to your point, we have a code of conduct for block producers, and we have a constitution. we need to enforce that code of conduct. In order, EOS is an organization. As an organization, we need to have a, high enough standing in terms of ethics, business ethics, transparency, and you cannot have it without enforcing your code of conduct. Like in any organization, any large company you're part of, if you're violating code of conduct, you're out. That's the only way to enforce it, right? And if those rules are not enforced, then they will be violated. And when they will be violated, then your ethics will degrade. And when your ethics degrades, that will be obvious to outside world that this is not an ethical organization, not a transparent organization. And that organization will, at the end, will not survive in the long run. So that's a survival issue, and we have to focus on those issues today.
And that's what's scary is that, the thing that I have a problem with is what me and Kevin talked about on the Crypto Trader Pro show, was that basically these mining operations and large exchanges and conglomerates are bringing their culture into an ecosystem that was largely built on our backs. So we're the guys up, putting all of our time and dime and effort into trying to build this infrastructure and solve these problems where, we feel like if it's not changed, that more or less we'll all be voted out and they'll reap the rewards from it. And they just created a big money machine for themselves. And that's sad. That's very sad.
That's that same problem of just, I'm not picking on Bitfinex in particular, but it's just an easy example that they can have all this power, wait for you guys to build the EOS ecosystem and just move their chess piece in and become the #1 block producer.
Well, that's where you get forked out, though. I mean, they'll learn a lesson that you can fork a community. You can. Dan's wrong about that. You absolutely can fork a community when you have made 75% of them angry by these acts. Yeah, so they'll learn a very valuable lesson that all that money in a chain with a bunch of whales doesn't mean anything. You know what I'm saying? Like if there's no one there.
It goes back to your point about like what would we do in the worst possible scenario where it became a complete authoritarianism virtual state, basically. What would we do? Well, there is no we. It's just we is a collection of individuals. So what I would do is sell my tokens and exit the ecosystem and find another tribe, basically.
Right.
And if enough of the collective individuals did that, the token value would collapse and kill everybody off, right? The host would die.
And that's what's going on right now, is like the 75-80% of people, and I'm just vocal about saying it. We love EOS with all of our hearts. We poured our lives into it, and why we say this is because we care. We're not pandering for votes. It's very obvious by our voting record that we're not. You know what I mean? This is not a popular view among the finance class, and it's the same thing that we deal with from the blue collar guys to the white collar guys to the ruling class. People who come from finance often end up later in life in the ruling class. They do. They're voted into roundtable groups.
The revolving doors, they call it, right?
Right. And it's just, but those of us who come from maybe a blue collar background or weren't super rich, maybe, upper middle class or something, or middle class, or even lower middle class, or even just lower class. If we get our biggest ideal is just maybe one day we can get into the finance class and have our money making money for us so we can do the things that matter. That's where we tend to focus, but people who already have that, they're playing a much bigger game. They're looking at how they consolidate and make their money, expand their sphere of influence
and create generational wealth type of thing.
Right.
So, our generation, we are given a unique chance. We are given a unique chance to change the world, and we can make it happen for our kids, or we can totally screw it up.
Totally.
We can enslave them,
and fall into the same greed, patterns that we have been, our previous generations were falling in. But it's our moment, it's our chance to shine, right? And I often get, even from my meetup, I get feedback from, guys who owns maybe thousands of EOS, and the feedback is like, I did not vote because I don't know whom to vote. I don't feel like, I can vote. I don't want to expose my private key, or, I don't know whom to vote, so I just don't vote. And my feedback is, well, if you don't vote, if all of you guys, smaller guys, don't vote, then you leave it up to big players to decide what's the way this whole will progress, the whole system, right? So it's just a message for all voters that you really do your research and find block producers that have a philosophy that corresponds with your philosophy, that have a vision, and make your choice. And you can vote up to 30. In fact, I encourage you to vote for 30 and vote for smaller guys who can bring value, who have been bringing value to this community. I can talk about EOS Tribes that we have been, prior to launch, while many of players in the community were actually doing self-advertising and politics, I totally, and Steve can confirm it, I blacked everything out. I was just focusing on technology, on tech. I was working on I proposed this WireGuard secure mesh proposal to do a secure launch.
Skipped a step. Arrowhead became the core group that was Ghostbusters. Eugene is such a bad marketer, and
I'm horrible. I'm just a geek.
Like is the guys that stood up the chain, and like we're number 46. Yeah.
So we were focusing on the technology. We wanted to make sure that the launch is successful. That was our priority number one. Obviously, we haven't focused on self-advertising, and so we kind of,
I was busy with the portal.
We paid for it, right? So, but I just wanted to make that clear, that we were focusing on technology and not marketing. And sometimes, and regular voters should take that into account. They should look into smaller guys who have been contributing, creating projects, and they need to,
But that's also marketing, though, right? You guys as EOS Tribe. That's part of your marketing, is to make sure they know what you've been up to. Because how else are they going to find out about
but you didn't hear much from us the last 2 or 3 months.
That's on you, though, guys, right? And no disrespect, but that's on you.
We saw the choke point. We saw definitely that without the voting mechanism and the voter education, and that without a secure, network, that this thing was going to go down like the Hindenburg, at least in the first few weeks. Or not get activated for a long time and cause FUD. There are all these bad variables, and we had to make a decision. Do we put our time into the things that will matter maybe later, even if we're not super popular right now and people don't know, or do we do the things that matter? And it's just part of our core philosophy. I mean, that's why me and Eugene, we're polar opposites. We're like the odd couple, in every way possible, like I'm outspoken, he's reserved, he's from Russia, I'm from Texas. Like it's as far away, but our core, like what we're after is just a better world for our children. That's our selfish knit. We really do want our kids when they're 15 to 30 to just have a good ride, not have it as bumpy as maybe we had it. That's all it is, man. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Yeah.
I was going to ask you that earlier on when we were talking about the underdogs. What is it that EOS Tribe stands for? Because the problem, like we just said, is you look the average Joe who knows a tiny bit about crypto and has got some EOS tokens. They're like, "What's all this, and who do I vote for?" So
I'll give you a rundown. Okay, here's our core values. Right, people are the purpose. We believe that everything we do for EOS is to enrich the lives of people across the globe. People are the reason we do what we do, and we try to never lose sight of that. Purpose over duty. We will never waver from our duty of keeping the EOS network stable and secure, because our commitment to the people on the network we serve. We believe doing the right thing while abiding by the rules outlined in the EOS Constitution is always our true north in every decision we make. At the same time, we do not operate as a heartless machine, as those are the very types of organizational structures and processes we are trying to free ourselves and others from. Trust over control. Block producer trust is paramount for a governed blockchain to function. We embrace the wisdom of the crowd, always leading from behind, humble stewards who only give direction if and when we can truly add value. Transparency over trust. Our loyalty is always to the EOS token holders and network, not our positions or affiliations. We're seeing that now. Transparency around our associations and financial interest is more than just a line item in our core values. It's the center of our brand promise and communication strategy. If elected, we will provide a public wallet address to anyone to audit, and have been the first to actually suggest this, that other BPs do the same. Integrity over pride. Integrity is our lighthouse and the only metric that matters to the outcome of the decisions that we make. The root of many indiscretions among the human race is often rooted in pride. Greed and many selfish acts are simply projections of self-pride and preservation. Staying rooted and down to earth is very important to the tribe culture. Integrity in our work, our dealings with others, and especially any and all affairs relating to the EOS network are among our highest ideals. And we've shown that. We can say that we did it, but that's kind of our way, is to just show you guys like, hey, you know, we say this, but let's go out and do it. Let's execute on these things. And hopefully people will start picking up. You know, we have a really strong culture. We do. Like, everyone in the whole ecosystem recognizes it. It's infectious. Once you start really digging in and what we do and how we are, we're like the guys that you would have a beer with at the bar, but also the consummate professional that you respect, like in execution. And that's kind of the balance that we're trying to, you know, we're not idealists. You know, we have a very, very strategic, clear path to, you know, to adoption that we see from the UX and HCI side and from the security side. And that's kind of our unique value proposition. That's what we bring to the table. I guess that's the, that's the diplomatic answer.
Good.
Well
So
good, Steve.
that was very good. So then anyone who resonates with that, they know who to vote for.
I mean, we came from big corporate backgrounds. I worked at an agency, you know, I owned an agency in Dallas that worked with big healthcare organizations and, you know, regulated companies, bankruptcy attorneys, and, you know, all this stuff that made me see a certain way of doing business that I just didn't agree with. And I believe that you can have a balance. You can be fun and you can be fair. You might cuss. Oh my goodness. You might cuss once or twice. Like, you can be human, you know, but be professional too. There's just a balance. I'd say that Eugene's definitely the, you know, he's all steak and no sizzle, right? Like, I'm on the other.
I was part of Federal Reserve Bank. I deployed some security systems for Federal Reserve Bank, and I built systems. And I can say that as much as bashing is going on about Federal Reserve Bank, again, people who work there, they're pretty good, and they believe what they're doing is good, and they, you know, add value to the economy. But it's a higher up level, right? Those people who have power, who make decisions, who may in the long run hurt economies and, you know, and general population, that's whom I do not approve. But regular people just doing their jobs, you know, they're doing their best.
It's always, the answer is always somewhere in the middle. It's like I said with banks, it's like most of that is a corruption amongst the 1 or 2% that's causing a lot of those problems. Should we just crap on all the good people who are working at a bank that, like, hey, I'm just doing my job? You know what I mean? That's always the case. It's never
a certain culture, right?
Right. Well, it's like the corporatism that we've heard a lot of people complain about is due to centralization. We know that much now. As a culture, we're waking up to that. But then it's also the part of why I'm trying to make a point with our culture and show this balance and these core values to people is that, you know, as companies, these large corporations operate as sociopaths. You know, not any one person does, but as a collective organization. You know, and if the organization itself had a more human ideal that they held their brand promise to, and they actually held themselves to, you wouldn't see them overstep and do these things. But their main number one thing is to stay in business and to make money at all costs. So you end up with this like sociopathic collective culture that is becomes a kleptocracy. You know, or an aristocracy like we're seeing. And that it's unfortunate, but is it any one person's fault? Are we railing against the system? No, it's just a dysfunction of humanity, you know?
I would argue if any of us will end up in the top 2%, we would get corrupt. And it doesn't mean those people who are in top 2%, they're bad. They're not bad. They just ended up with that power, and power corrupts. And that's just human nature. So in order for us to save from ourselves from corruption, we just have to not get that power in the first place.
We've told ourselves if we launch an incubator and 3 or 4 dApps and do very well, we have like a 24 to 36 month window to be a BP. If we ever are elected in, we always wanted to set an example. Like the way we put our particular transparency dashboard will be one of probably the most like detailed of any that's out when we release it. We want to have data points and set the example. And then just as we become fat cats and people are like, okay, guys, we bow out, and say, no, like we've got plenty of DApps. We're good. We did very well for ourselves, and to pay that forward with like public projects, supporting the DACs that pop up and that work, that are functional. And just that kind of thinking of like stewardship that this was all supposed to be about, and if you set that example, maybe there'll be 10 guys that don't, but it only takes a few good guys and that strong culture in any business, like in any nation, in any tribe, and to spark that revolution of change. Mm-hmm. It's just an idea. It's just an idea is where it starts,
my final project that, I can rest easily after we have to launch satellite. After we launch with satellite, I'm just planning to go into education and just retire from BP operations.
He was that close from being an astronaut.
That's kind of our final goal. We had that very ambitious
Project Gaia. Yeah. It is a lot of academics like picked it apart, but technically you can do a low orbit static satellite. I mean, Phil Mesnier's confirmed that. He's actually worked on the code from some of those, and he's good friends with Eugene. Imagine that. We didn't just bring it up with some half-baked idea. I mean, these guys are smart individuals. It would be a backup node. Everybody picked that apart, and I'm like, we're not talking about a producing node.
No, it's not a producing node. It's just a full backup. Yeah.
I'm like wondering why they thought that. Like, this dude's got a PhD in computer science. Come on. Not his first rodeo.
Right. So that point about the culture there and the EOS Tribe culture, which came as a result of my question of what does EOS Tribe stand for? Brilliant answer, right? So now the question is, which is what one we can answer right now, is of all of the EOS token holders, what proportion of them match that value system? Because you would assume that if everyone voted and 15% of all EOS token holders
I could name off
directly,
3 or 4 people that I definitely think should have a much better chance than they do right now. And it would be EOS Detroit, and it would probably be Blocksmith. Their heart's in it, and they've got a good technical operation. I would let Eugene add a few more to that. I don't want to take up all the list.
I would like to see all our technical VPs that I worked very closely. Said, I want those guys to be around when something happens with the blockchain, when we have technical issues. I believe those are the guys who can fix those issues. It's not going to be exchanges, believe me. It's going to be those technical guys, and it's EOS Sweden, EOS 42, EOS Detroit, is a good one. HKS.
I think we're talking about like people that aren't up in the top 21 already. Some of them, like EOS Rio, Sweden, they're already up pretty high, producing blocks, falling in and out.
We have about half of the technical team. I'm glad. That makes me kind of feel safer about EOS in general. We have them inactive, and we want to keep them inactive. But there are others who contributed as well, and who are very technical. That ideally we would like to see them in those top 21 roles as well. So they can do actions, because when technical problems happen, it's those active block producers who can actually take steps. If you're a standby, even if you have a technical expertise, you can advise, but there is not much you can do, technically speaking, to rescue the blockchain. So it's all in hands of active block producers.
Cool. Now I want to let that point linger, so let's cut it off there. And guys, thanks very much for being on the Cryptoverse today.
Thank you. Thank you.